Firstly, can I warmly welcome the noble Lord, Lord Moore of Etchingham. His witty, erudite and insightful speech shows what an asset he'll be here, so welcome. My Lords, this elections bill is designed to strengthen the integrity of the electoral process and therefore strengthen UK democracy per se, and that's a worthy aim we should all embrace. But I worry that the bill takes an overly technocratic and legalistic approach that evades deeper problems and cultural trends that undermine democratic norms today, from assaults on free speech to the fashion for casting aspersions on the capacity and motives of voters. Also, when I'm lobbied by opponents of the bill who say the legislation, quote, wouldn't look out of place in Hungary, Russia or China, I do fear hyperbole and partisan paranoia might distort the important public debates we need to have about democratic elections that this bill should positively kickstart. I have, like other Lords, a lot of specific areas I want to ask the questions about at committee stage. Will restrictions on third-party campaigning lead to disengagement of civil society organisations from political activism? Why on earth did the government table changing the voting system so late in the day? But for now, some comments on the alleged voter fraud issue. I welcome the bill tackling the problems of postal voting. The noble Lord, Lord Pickles, described concerns over harvesting votes, which I think many of us have shared for some time. And of course, postal voting is necessary, but it should be a narrow, particular form of voting, not a go-to device so open to abuse. And tightening of this would help and shore up the legitimacy of elections, I've no doubt. The same motivation is used by the government to justify the controversial voter ID scheme. However, I'm less convinced this illiberal show us your papers measure is either proportionate or necessary when the data shows such minuscule examples of voter fraud as we've heard. I don't go along with the overblown conspiracy theories that see voter ID as a dastardly Tory plot of deliberate voter suppression, as one Guardian editorial called it, or an evil attempt to rig the system to disempower the poorest and most marginalised. No, I think that's unhelpful, that kind of discussion. My objections are rather those raised by the noble Lord Blunkett, the unintended consequences, that rather than reassuring voters that elections aren't being corrupted by fraud, voter ID gives the impression that vote rigging is such a wide-scale problem that we need to change the law. Surely this puts an unnecessary question mark over election results and inadvertently sows suspicion amongst public of their fellow voters. Perhaps one underlying reason for all this focus on fraud is a more worrying problem beyond technical solutions, and that is the increasing disillusion with the democratic decision-making process as expressed by a greater willingness to refuse to accept the outcome of legitimate votes. We've seen the emergence of the withdrawal of losers' consent from recent election results. In America, Donald Trump stopped the Steele assault on the legitimacy of Joe Biden's election as president is a case in point. But sadly, the precedent for this was set closer to home, as in the attempts to frustrate and suppress the democratic result of the 2016 referendum, often led by powerful voices in the establishment, celebrity QCs turning to the law courts, the People's Voter campaign, the likes of John Major, who's been cited for everybody here, Lib Dem Lords, in fact, who called for a second referendum that demanded going back to the polls until voters gave the correct answer. While many who oppose voter ID worry about disenfranchising electors now, for me, the deeper problem is how widespread it's become to tell millions of voters, many who voted for the first time, that once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation vote shouldn't have counted, with attempts to delegitimise and tear up their vote by maligning 17.4 million citizens for being duped, not educated enough to know what they were voting for. So if the aim of Part 1 of the bill is to bolster trust in elections, I suggest that far more effective than voter ID would be a robust campaign to restore the value of losers' consent and to ensure that democratic outcomes are respected, however unpalatable those in power find voters' choices. There's also been a lot of disquiet expressed today about proposals to hold the Electoral Commission to account, critiqued as a dangerous government interference in the Electoral Commission's independence. I want to ask how independent the Electoral Commission really is. The Electoral Commission outed itself as breaking its own impartiality code when the UK had the largest vote in its history. Its chair and commissioners expressed their regret that the electorate voted to leave the EU, i.e. they voted the wrong way. And these Remain sentiments were not just confined to their opinions, but were wielded as power, with so much systematic investigation, prosecution, threats of fines, ultimately harassment of Leave campaign groups and activists, that the present chair of the Electoral Commission, John Pullinger, had to issue a public apology to the likes of Darren Grimes and so on. And while Leavers have been cleared, there are still those who cite the Electoral Commission investigations as an official stamp of approval to repeat misinformation about the legitimacy of Brexit. Personally, I think it's time we question whether democracy benefits from a quango set up to adjudicate and stand above democracy itself at all. I would rather remind my lords there's already a powerful and fully independent body that can hold politicians and political parties to account. It's called the electorate. I appreciate my power to the people stance will be dismissed sneerily as populism, but I'm rather proud of trusting the people myself.
My lords, I would like to join the many congratulations